Tonight's story begins with an invitation that most people in history would hesitate to accept. A thick sheet of parchment arrives at your door, sealed in red wax and pressed with the unmistakable Tudor rose. Even before you break the seal, you understand this is not an ordinary letter. Messages from the King of England rarely are. Inside, the handwriting is elegant, deliberate, almost charming. King Henry VIII requests the pleasure of your company for an evening of dining and music at Hampton Court Palace. The wording is polite, warm, even, but the sender is a man whose romantic history reads less like a fairy tale and more like a cautionary rhyme whispered in court corridors. 6 wives, 2 divorced, 2 executed, 1 died, 1 survived. Those statistics linger in your mind far longer than the ink on the page. Still, you reassure yourself. This is only dinner. People attend royal banquets all the time and live perfectly normal lives afterward. Probably. Preparations begin immediately. In Tudor England, clothing is never simply clothing. It is strategy. Too modest, and you risk appearing dull. Too bold, and you risk appearing threatening. Too intelligent, and you might seem intimidating. Not intelligent enough, and you risk boring the king. The balance must be precise. Jewelry is selected carefully, elegant, but not extravagant, graceful, but not competitive with the crown itself. Your friends react in predictable ways. Some gasp with excitement. You're dining with the king himself. Others stare at you with the same expression reserved for someone announcing they plan to wrestle a lion. One friend offers practical advice. Laugh at his jokes. Another whispers urgently, and whatever you do, do not mention the previous wives. As the day approaches, excitement and calculation wrestle quietly inside your thoughts. Henry VIII, in his youth, was admired across Europe. He was athletic, educated, charismatic, a Renaissance prince who composed music, debated theology, and dazzled foreign courts. You tell yourself that perhaps this is the version of Henry you will meet tonight. Not the suspicious, temperamental monarch history sometimes remembers. Hopefully, eventually, the carriage arrives. Hampton Court Palace rises ahead of you like a monument built to impress. Tall red brick towers, ornate chimneys climbing toward the sky, banners bearing the Tudor rose snapping in the wind. The palace does not quietly display wealth. It announces it. Your carriage rolls into the courtyard, and immediately you feel it. The attention. Courtiers gather in small clusters pretending not to watch you, while very clearly watching you. Ladies in embroidered gowns tilt their heads slightly. Men in polished doublets observe you the way investors evaluate risky ventures. Because dating the king is not a private matter, it is a political event. You step down carefully from the carriage. Even the smallest misstep would echo through palace gossip before morning. Inside, Hampton Court is overwhelming. Massive tapestries cover the walls, depicting biblical scenes and heroic victories. The ceilings stretch high enough to remind every visitor how small they are compared to the crown. Servants move silently through the corridors. Every doorway seems slightly larger than necessary. Every portrait appears to watch you pass. You remind yourself again, it is only dinner, but the atmosphere feels less like a meal and more like the beginning of a performance. When you enter the Great Hall, the scale becomes impossible to ignore. Long banquet tables gleam with silver goblets. Candles burn in perfect symmetry. Musicians wait quietly at the edge of the room, instruments ready. This is not dining. This is theater. And tonight, you are part of the cast. A lady in waiting leans closer and speaks softly. His Majesty appreciates confidence, she says. Then she adds quickly, not arrogance. Another courtier whispers nearby. He enjoys wit and loyalty. The first one finishes carefully. Ah, there it is. The real requirement. You are not here simply to enjoy the king's company. You are here to see whether you fit within his world. The room grows quiet before the king even appears. Conversations fade. Backs straighten. A ripple of stillness spreads through the court. Then the doors open. Henry VIII enters. He does not hurry. He does not need to. The space rearranges itself around him. Broad-shouldered, dressed in velvet and fur embroidered with gold thread, He looks less like a man attending dinner and more like authority given human form. Jewels glint in the candlelight as he raises a hand in acknowledgement of the synchronized bows surrounding him. Then his gaze settles on you. And he smiles. It is warm, confident, practiced. You immediately understand how this has happened so many times before. Because Henry, when he wishes to be, is extraordinarily charming. He approaches slowly, boots echoing softly against the polished floor. Up close, his presence feels larger than expected. Not only physically, energetically. "My lady," he says, his voice calm and controlled. "I am pleased you accepted my invitation." You curtsy carefully, not too deeply, not too briefly. "It is my honor, your majesty." For a moment, he studies you longer than comfort allows. Not romantically, evaluatively. Then he laughs, loudly and warmly, and the tension melts. The evening begins with charm. He asks about your journey, compliments your attire, mentions hearing about your intelligence. Your responses are measured, clever, but not challenging, confident, but not dominant. Conversation feels less like flirting and more like diplomacy disguised as small talk. Yet you begin to understand something dangerous. Henry does not flirt lightly. He overwhelms. His compliments arrive quickly, generously, placing admiration around you like a velvet cloak. It is intoxicating. You imagine how Anne Boleyn must once have felt. How Catherine of Aragon must once have believed she was secure. Charm delivered by a king can feel like destiny. But beneath the admiration lies expectation. Every compliment carries a silent condition. You are intelligent, but not too independent. Confident, but never oppositional. Captivating, but completely loyal. Dinner begins. Platters arrive in magnificent procession. Roasted venison, spiced poultry, elaborate towers of sugared fruit. A swan, arranged with theatrical precision, becomes the centerpiece of one course. This is not merely food. It is propaganda. Every dish quietly declares England's wealth and the king's power. Henry eats with calm confidence. You mirror him carefully. Small bites. Controlled movements. Because the court watches everything. How you hold your goblet. How quickly you eat. Whether you laugh at the correct moments. This is not a romantic dinner. It is a public examination. As the evening continues, you notice something unsettling. The room revolves around Henry. If he laughs, everyone laughs. If he pauses, conversations stop. Power here does not shout. It radiates. At one point, a servant places a goblet slightly out of alignment. The king's expression tightens for only a moment, but the entire table freezes. Then Henry smiles again, and the tension dissolves. The lesson, however, has already been delivered. Charm and authority exist side by side. Later, conversation shifts gently toward legacy, toward heirs, toward sons. Henry speaks thoughtfully about the future of England and the importance of securing the Tudor line. He does not demand, he simply explains. Yet everyone understands the message. The music resumes softly. Henry rises and takes up a lute. Yes, the king himself plays. And surprisingly well. The melody is graceful, almost tender. For a moment, you glimpse another version of him. Not the calculating monarch, but the young Renaissance prince who once captivated Europe. The applause afterward is genuine. He returns to his seat and looks at you expectantly. You praise the performance sincerely, but carefully. Balance is survival. As the evening draws to a close, Henry invites you to walk in the palace gardens. Night has settled over Hampton Court. Torches flicker along the pathways. Water murmurs softly in fountains. The gardens feel almost romantic. Almost. Henry speaks of destiny, of England's future, of the responsibilities of a king. He pauses occasionally to study you again. You realize something important. This entire evening has not been a date. It has been an audition. Eventually the walk ends. There are no dramatic declarations. No grand promises. Henry simply thanks you for your company with a measured smile. But you sense a decision forming behind his calm expression. In Tudor England, approval is rarely spoken aloud. It reveals itself later, through invitations, through proximity, through access. As your carriage departs Hampton Court, The palace fades behind you in the darkness. You exhale slowly. You survived dinner with Henry VIII. And in Tudor England, that alone is considered a success. Morning arrives quietly. No trumpets. No royal messengers pounding urgently on your door. No sealed decree announcing your fate. Just sunlight through the window. And honestly, that alone feels like a victory. You wake and perform a quick mental inventory. You are alive. You have not been accused of treason. You have not accidentally insulted the king. You have not been escorted to the Tower of London. So far, things are going remarkably well. But Tudor England rarely delivers its consequences immediately. It prefers suspense. By late morning, subtle signals begin to appear. A courtier who barely acknowledged you yesterday now greets you warmly. A lady in waiting lingers in conversation a little longer than usual. Someone casually remarks that His Majesty seemed very pleased with the evening. Pleased, that word again. Not enchanted, not captivated, just pleased. In the strange language of royal courts, pleased could mean almost anything. It could mean you made a favorable impression, or it could mean you were simply an entertaining distraction. You replay the evening in your mind. Every conversation, every pause, every carefully chosen word. Did you laugh enough? Did you speak too much? Did you remain silent too often? Did you respond to the conversation about heirs with the correct balance of loyalty and neutrality? Dating Henry VIII, you realize, involves a surprising amount of post-event analysis. Meanwhile, London begins whispering. Rumors travel faster than horses. By afternoon, two possibilities circulate through the city. Either you are the king's newest fascination, or you were merely a pleasant dinner guest. In Tudor England, those two categories are separated by a very thin line. And standing on that line can be dangerous. Because if the king decides he likes you, your life will change forever. Another invitation would mean more than dinner. It would mean involvement in court politics, in succession, in the fragile, dangerous world of royal favor. If the king loses interest, then life quietly returns to normal. You disappear from the palace orbit and resume a peaceful existence. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Which outcome is actually better? Power is intoxicating, but so is safety. As evening approaches, no messenger arrives. No sealed parchment. No royal command. The silence stretches. You begin to wonder whether the entire evening will simply fade into memory. And perhaps that is the best possible ending. Because Henry VIII is not merely a man. He is a force, and proximity to forces often comes with consequences. To understand the weight of this situation, one must remember the king's history. Henry did not approach relationships cautiously. He fell intensely, publicly, dramatically. When he loved someone, the entire kingdom knew. Catherine of Aragon had once been adored. For years she stood beside him as a respected queen, even governing England while Henry campaigned abroad. Yet when the marriage no longer produced a male heir, devotion slowly turned into frustration. Eventually Henry reshaped the entire religious structure of England to end the marriage. Anne Boleyn followed. Sharp, charismatic, impossible to ignore. Henry pursued her with relentless determination. For years he wrote letters filled with passion and promises. She became queen, and only 3 years later, she was executed. The charges were shocking: adultery, treason, conspiracy. Historians still debate how much was truth and how much was political convenience. Then came Jane Seymour, gentler, quieter, less controversial. She gave Henry the son he desperately wanted. But she died shortly after childbirth. Anne of Cleves followed. That marriage ended quickly, quietly annulled after Henry decided he did not find her appealing. Then Catherine Howard, young, charming, reckless. She too would eventually lose her head. Finally, Catherine Parr, the survivor, a careful woman who understood how to navigate the dangerous currents of the Tudor court. By the time your carriage left Hampton Court last night, history had already written most of this pattern. Admiration, elevation, expectation, and sometimes, when expectations failed, replacement. Those who live close to the king understand something essential. Favor is temporary. Power in Tudor England does not remain stable. It shifts constantly. A noble who stands confidently beside the king today may disappear from court tomorrow. A queen may sit beside the throne one year and vanish from history the next. Everyone watches Henry carefully, not just his words, his moods, his expressions, his silences, because the smallest change in tone can alter a life forever. You experienced this during dinner. The brief moment when a servant moved too slowly. The instant tension froze the entire room. The smile that returned just seconds later. Charm and volatility live very close together in the king's personality. It is part of what makes him so compelling. And so dangerous. Days pass. Then another. Still no royal summons arrives. And slowly, the tension begins to fade. The court continues its endless dance of politics and ambition. New rumors replace old ones. Other stories claim attention. Perhaps the king has already moved on. Perhaps the evening was simply one pleasant moment in an endless sequence of royal entertainments. And perhaps that is fortunate. Because surviving one dinner with Henry VIII is impressive. Surviving an entire marriage, history suggests the odds are far less comfortable. Henry VIII remains one of the most complex figures in English history. A man capable of writing beautiful music. A scholar who debated religion with enthusiasm. An athlete admired across Europe in his youth. And yet also a ruler whose decisions altered a nation's religion, politics, and royal bloodline forever. To meet him, even briefly, was to stand near the center of historical gravity. And that gravity pulled strongly. Perhaps that is why so many people were drawn into his orbit despite the risks. Because for all the danger, Henry possessed something undeniable. Charisma, conviction, the belief that history itself moved according to his will. Which, in many ways, it did. And if you truly had dined with Henry VIII, the most remarkable part of the story would not be the conversation, the music, or the palace. It would be something much simpler. You walked away, alive, and in Tudor England. That was sometimes the greatest success of all. Long before written language, before cities rose from the earth, before temples reached toward the sky, there was breath moving through bone. Deep inside caves in what is now southern Germany, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary. Among ancient tools and fragments of everyday life were objects that did not belong to hunting or survival. They were flutes, not crude noisemakers, but carefully carved instruments made from bird bones and mammoth ivory. These flutes are among the oldest musical instruments ever found, dating back more than 40,000 years. Each one contains small finger holes placed at deliberate intervals. Someone understood how pitch worked. Someone experimented with sound. Imagine the moment. A fire flickers against cave walls covered in animal paintings. Outside, the Ice Age world stretches cold and dangerous beneath the night sky. Inside the cave, someone lifts a hollow bone to their lips. They breathe out. A clear note echoes through the darkness. For the first time, sound is not simply heard. It is created intentionally. That moment may have changed human culture forever. Even before flutes existed, early humans were already surrounded by rhythm. The steady beat of a heart. Footsteps moving across stone. The repeated strike of tools against rock. Thunder rolling across distant hills. Rhythm did not need invention. It existed everywhere. All humans needed to do was imitate it. The earliest musical instruments were likely simple percussion tools. Hands striking hollow logs. Sticks tapping against stone. Feet stamping the earth. These early rhythms brought people together. Anthropologists studying traditional cultures have noticed something fascinating. Rhythm almost always appears first in communal gatherings. A single drumbeat can coordinate movement. It can synchronize groups. It can transform scattered individuals into a unified community. Around fires, under open skies, people gathered in circles. Someone began tapping a rhythm. Another joined. Then another. Soon the entire group moved in time. Music was not entertainment yet. It was connection. The drum may be humanity's oldest instrument. Unlike bone flutes, drums rarely survive in the archaeological record. Wood rots. Animal skins decay. But evidence of early drums appears in nearly every ancient culture. A stretched hide across a wooden frame can transform a simple strike into a powerful resonance. A hollow tree trunk can amplify sound across large distances. And the effect is physical. Low drum beats vibrate through the chest. They can be felt as much as heard. This physical sensation makes rhythm powerful. Where melody floats in the air, rhythm lives in the body. In early societies, drums guided ceremonies. They prepared warriors for battle. They marked the transition from childhood to adulthood. They accompanied births, funerals, and harvest celebrations. Rhythm structured human life. Long before music became art, it was organization. Eventually, humans discovered another kind of sound: tension. At some point, someone plucked a stretched string and noticed something remarkable. The vibration lingered. Unlike the sharp strike of a drum, the sound shimmered and continued. It could be tuned. Tighten the string, and the pitch rises. Loosen it, and the sound deepens. From this simple observation came the ancestors of harps and lyres. Some historians believe the earliest inspiration came from hunting bows. A bowstring twangs loudly when released. Hunters would have heard this sound many times. Curiosity may have led someone to ask, what happens if we add more strings? What if those strings are attached to a hollow body that amplifies the vibration? Suddenly, music changed. Multiple notes could sound together. Harmony appeared. As early civilizations developed, instruments became more sophisticated. In ancient Mesopotamia, archaeologists discovered beautifully decorated lyres in royal burial sites. These instruments were not simple tools. They were artistic objects. Wooden frames carved carefully, strings stretched precisely, gold and gemstone decorations covering the surface. Music had become part of royal culture. Temple musicians performed hymns for the gods. Court performers accompanied epic poetry. Sound now carried emotion, religion, and political power. The same pattern appeared in ancient Egypt. Paintings on temple walls show ensembles of harpists and wind players performing during religious ceremonies. Music filled sacred spaces. Sound became a bridge between humans and the divine. Wind instruments evolved alongside strings and drums. Instruments made from reeds, bone, and bamboo allowed musicians to control air in new ways. Unlike the quiet cave flutes of prehistoric Europe, later wind instruments could be loud and commanding. In ancient Egypt, reed pipes accompanied religious rituals. In China, complex mouth organs allowed several notes to sound simultaneously. These instruments transformed breath into architecture. Air flowed through carefully designed chambers to produce layered tones. Breath had always carried life. Now it carried music across temples and public ceremonies. Some wind instruments even served military purposes. Bronze trumpets and horns could signal armies across great distances. One blast could command movement. Another could demand silence. Sound became authority. In many ancient cultures, music was believed to connect humans with the spiritual world. In Sumerian temples, musicians performed hymns daily for the goddess Inanna. These performances were not entertainment. They were ritual. The vibration of instruments was believed to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. In ancient Greece, philosophers took this idea even further. Thinkers like Pythagoras studied the mathematical relationships between musical notes. He believed that harmony reflected the structure of the universe itself. According to Greek philosophy, even the movement of planets produced a kind of cosmic music, a concept known as the music of the spheres. To ancient thinkers, music was not merely sound. It was order. It was mathematics. It was the structure of reality itself. As trade routes expanded across continents, instruments began to travel with merchants. The Silk Road carried not only silk and spices but also musical ideas. String instruments from the Middle East evolved into new forms as they moved east and west. One such instrument eventually became the ancestor of the lute, which later influenced the development of the guitar. Wind instruments changed shape depending on local materials. Drums appeared in countless variations across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Cultures borrowed ideas from one another. They adapted them. They reshaped them. Music became one of humanity's first global languages. For thousands of years, music existed only in memory. A melody survived because someone remembered it. A rhythm endured because it was repeated. But eventually, humans tried to record sound itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets discovered in the city of Ugarit contain one of the oldest known examples of musical notation. These tablets describe hymns and instructions for playing them on lyres. Later, ancient Greek musicians developed systems to mark musical notes above lines of poetry. Music was slowly becoming something that could be written, studied, and preserved. Sound had entered history. The origin of musical instruments reveals something profound about human nature. People living in harsh Ice Age environments carved flutes not because they had spare time, but because they needed expression. Music organizes emotion. It marks time. It strengthens communities. It transforms individual feeling into shared experience. Drums align bodies. Flutes carry breath. Strings create harmony. Instruments extend the natural abilities of the human body. They amplify what we feel. And perhaps that is why music appears in every known culture. Languages differ. Traditions vary. But rhythm, melody, and harmony exist everywhere. The first flute maker in a prehistoric cave could never have imagined symphonies, orchestras, or concert halls. But they understood something essential. The air around them could carry emotion. And once humans discovered that, we never stopped shaping sound. The English word, paradise, sounds heavenly. It brings to mind clouds, eternal peace, and distant spiritual worlds. But the word did not begin in heaven. It began on earth. More specifically, in the dry landscapes of ancient Persia. The origin of the word comes from the Old Persian term, paradisa. It meant something very simple. A walled enclosure. Not angels. Not heaven. Walls. In the vast landscapes of the Iranian plateau, this idea carried enormous meaning. The region was harsh. Summer heat could scorch the land for months. Strong winds carried dust across wide open plains. Water was scarce. Outside cultivated areas, survival was never guaranteed. In such an environment, a wall did more than define space. It created refuge. Inside the wall, there could be shade, water, trees, and carefully arranged beauty. Outside the wall, the desert stretched endlessly. The contrast between those two worlds shaped the Persian idea of paradise. Paradise was not escape from reality. It was order created within it. During the Achaemenid Empire, especially under rulers like Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE, gardens became symbols of royal authority. To conquer territory was impressive, but to command nature itself was something greater. In Persian political philosophy, a king who could transform barren land into flourishing greenery demonstrated more than power. He demonstrated harmony. These royal gardens were not wild landscapes. They were carefully planned environments. Everything inside the walls had purpose. Paths aligned precisely. Trees were planted with intention. Water flowed along controlled channels. Every detail suggested balance. The garden was a statement. Civilization could overcome chaos. Water was the most precious element of the Persian garden. In dry climates, flowing water was almost magical. But Persian engineers developed remarkable technology to make it possible. Beneath the ground, they built qanats. These were underground tunnels that carried water from distant mountain aquifers across many miles of desert. Using gravity alone, the system slowly guided water toward settlements and gardens. No pumps, no machines, just careful engineering and patient construction. When the water finally reached the surface, it appeared calm and clear. In royal gardens, it was never hidden. Instead, it was displayed proudly. Channels divided the garden into symmetrical sections. Shallow pools reflected sunlight. The sound of gently flowing water filled the air. In a silent desert environment, that sound felt almost supernatural. Water meant life, and life inside the walls meant paradise. Persian gardens followed a specific design known as the Chahar Bagh, meaning 4 gardens. The space was divided into 4 equal sections by water channels or pathways. These lines crossed at the center, forming a symmetrical layout. Often a pavilion or reflecting pool stood at the intersection. The number 4 was deeply symbolic. Many ancient cosmologies described the world as divided into 4 parts, 4 directions, 4 corners of the earth, sometimes even 4 rivers flowing through the world. By dividing the garden into 4 sections, Persian designers were recreating the structure of the universe itself. The garden became a miniature version of cosmic order. Walking through it felt like stepping into a carefully balanced world. Nothing random, nothing chaotic, everything aligned. The plants inside Persian gardens were chosen carefully. Each species carried symbolism. One of the most common trees was the cypress. Tall and narrow, it grew upward like a living pillar. Because it stayed green year-round, it symbolized endurance and immortality. Nearby, fruit trees added life and abundance. Pomegranates were especially important. Their many seeds represented fertility and renewal. Figs, almonds, and quince trees filled the air with fragrance and color. Shade was also essential. In the intense desert sun, trees created cool spaces where people could walk comfortably. The garden became a carefully engineered microclimate. Inside the walls, the temperature dropped. Birds gathered in the branches. Flowers released their scent gradually throughout the day. Morning smelled different from evening. Everything changed slowly, gently, almost like breathing. Persian kings often received visitors inside these gardens. Diplomats, travelers, and foreign envoys walked along shaded paths before meeting the ruler. The design itself delivered a message. Water flowed peacefully. Trees grew in perfect order. The air felt calm and controlled. By the time visitors reached the king, they had already absorbed the idea. This ruler commanded harmony. Even hunting parks were designed using similar principles. These large enclosed landscapes contained animals, forests, and water sources. Greek travelers who encountered them called them paradisos. That Greek word later became the English word paradise. As centuries passed, Persian garden ideas spread into new cultures. When Islamic civilization expanded across the Middle East, the concept of the garden merged naturally with religious imagery. The Quran describes paradise as a garden beneath which rivers flow. The similarity to Persian garden design was striking. 4 rivers, shade, fruit trees, flowing water. Suddenly the Persian landscape design became a spiritual symbol. Gardens were built near mosques and palaces. Visitors would walk through them before entering sacred spaces. The experience mirrored the journey toward paradise. Even tombs were placed inside symmetrical gardens. The deceased rested at the center of order. The living walked the paths around them. Life and eternity met within the garden walls. The idea of the Persian garden did not remain in Persia. It traveled across continents. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, Greek culture encountered these remarkable landscapes. Later Islamic dynasties refined the concept even further. During the Safavid Empire, Persian cities like Isfahan incorporated garden design into urban planning. Entire avenues lined with trees and water channels extended the garden concept into city life. Further east, the Mughal Empire brought Persian garden design into India. One of the most famous examples stands today: the garden surrounding the Taj Mahal. Its symmetrical layout, reflecting pools, and central pathways all trace their origins back to ancient Persian ideas. Even European Renaissance gardens later adopted similar geometry and water features. Across centuries and cultures, the same principle survived. Paradise could be designed. Today, the word paradise often suggests a distant place, a perfect world beyond human reach. But its original meaning was far more practical. Paradise was something built. It required walls. It required water management. It required patience and constant care. Beyond the walls, the desert still existed. Wind still blew. Heat still returned. Without attention, the garden would fade back into dust. The ancient Persians understood this deeply. Paradise was not permanent. It was maintained. Balance had to be protected. Perhaps that is the most powerful lesson of the Persian garden. Perfection does not appear naturally. It must be cultivated. And sometimes, the most beautiful places in the world are not those untouched by human hands, but those shaped carefully by them. For most of human history, losing your sight did not mean darkness. It meant blur. Edges softened. Letters merged together, faces lost their detail. The world remained visible, but it slowly retreated beyond clarity. For centuries, there was little anyone could do about it. But humans are persistent creatures. Eventually, someone realized that light itself could be shaped. And that realization changed everything. The earliest hints appear in ancient Rome. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that small letters appeared larger when viewed through a globe of water. The observation was simple but important. Light passing through curved surfaces could magnify objects. Another curious story involves the Roman Emperor Nero. Some historical sources claim that Nero watched gladiatorial contests through a polished emerald. Historians still debate whether it actually corrected his vision or simply reduced glare from sunlight. Either way, the idea was there. Light could be manipulated, but for centuries, no one turned that discovery into a practical tool. By the Middle Ages, literacy was slowly expanding across Europe. Monasteries became centers of knowledge. Inside dimly lit rooms, monks spent hours copying manuscripts by hand. The work required intense concentration. Ink flowed slowly across parchment. Each letter had to be precise. But many scribes faced a frustrating problem. As they aged, their vision began to fail. This condition is called presbyopia, the natural loss of near focus that occurs with age. A monk might possess decades of knowledge, but if he could no longer read the text in front of him, that knowledge became difficult to share. As universities appeared in cities like Bologna and Paris, the demand for reading increased dramatically. Books were still rare and precious, but more scholars were studying them, and the problem of failing eyesight became impossible to ignore. Glass-making technology had improved significantly by the 13th century, especially in northern Italy. Artisans learned how to produce clear, polished glass lenses. The first tool developed to help readers was called the reading stone. It was a small dome-shaped lens placed directly on top of a page. When someone looked through it, the letters beneath appeared larger. It worked, but it had limitations. The stone had to stay on the page. The reader still needed both hands, and it only magnified a small portion of text at a time. The world had discovered magnification, but the solution was not yet complete. Sometime around the late 13th century, probably in northern Italy, someone made a simple but revolutionary leap. Instead of placing lenses on the page, why not place them in front of the eyes? The first eyeglasses appeared. They were simple devices. Two small convex lenses mounted in wooden or metal rims. The rims were connected by a small rivet in the center. These early spectacles did not rest comfortably on the nose. They had no arms to hook over the ears. They had to be balanced carefully or held in place. Yet despite their awkward design, they were transformative. For aging readers, the world suddenly sharpened again. Books that had become impossible to read returned to clarity. Knowledge returned with them. One of the earliest written references to eyeglasses appears in 1306. A Dominican friar named Giordano da Pisa mentioned in a sermon that spectacles had been invented recently. He even noted that people still remembered the inventor. Unfortunately, the inventor's name has been lost to history. But the idea spread quickly. Glassmakers in Venice, especially on the island of Murano, became famous for producing high-quality lenses. Venice guarded its glass-making secrets fiercely. Glass was valuable technology, and spectacles were becoming increasingly useful. Early paintings from the 14th century often show scholars or saints wearing glasses. The message was clear. Spectacles symbolized wisdom and learning. They were not signs of weakness. They were tools of knowledge. Then another invention accelerated the demand for vision correction. In the mid-15th century, Johannes Gutenberg introduced the printing press. Books that once required months of hand copying could now be reproduced quickly. Suddenly, text multiplied. Merchants needed to read contracts. Navigators studied detailed maps. Students read printed books. The ability to see clearly became economically valuable. Lens makers began experimenting with different shapes and curvatures. By the 16th century, concave lenses were developed to correct nearsightedness. For the first time, glasses helped people see distant objects clearly as well. Vision correction expanded beyond aging readers. It now addressed lifelong vision problems. As science advanced, understanding of optics improved. In the 17th century, scientists like Johannes Kepler explained how images form on the retina. Later, Isaac Newton studied how light bends and separates into different colors. These discoveries helped lens makers refine their craft. Eyeglasses were no longer simple magnifying tools. They became carefully calculated instruments. One particularly clever innovation came from Benjamin Franklin in the 18th century. Franklin needed glasses for both reading and distance vision. Switching between two pairs was inconvenient, so he cut the lenses in half and combined them into one frame. The result was the first bifocal glasses, two different lenses in a single pair. By the 18th and 19th centuries, spectacles had entered public life. They appeared in salons, courts, and city streets. Different styles emerged. The monocle, a single lens held in the eye socket, became a symbol of aristocratic sophistication. The lorgnette, glasses mounted on a handle, allowed wearers to briefly inspect objects or people during social gatherings. Meanwhile, improved frames introduced temple arms, the side pieces that rest over the ears. This design finally made glasses comfortable enough for everyday use. Materials expanded. Silver, gold, tortoiseshell, and finely crafted steel frames became popular. Glasses were no longer just tools. They were accessories. During the 19th century, industrial manufacturing transformed eyeglasses. Factories in Europe and the United States began producing lenses at large scale. Precision machines improved consistency. Optometry emerged as a professional field. Instead of guessing which lenses worked best, specialists began measuring eyesight scientifically. Vision tests became standardized. Eyeglasses became affordable for ordinary people. Teachers, factory workers, clerks, students. Millions gained access to clear vision for the first time. The 20th century brought rapid innovation. Plastic lenses replaced heavy glass, making eyewear lighter and safer. Sunglasses became popular, especially after aviator glasses were developed for pilots. Contact lenses also appeared, offering vision correction without frames. Later technologies introduced laser eye surgery, allowing some people to correct their vision permanently. Today, lenses are designed using computer precision. Anti-reflective coatings reduce glare. Blue light filters address digital screen use. Smart glasses even combine eyewear with digital technology. From medieval workshops to modern laboratories, the evolution of eyeglasses has been remarkable. Eyeglasses did something quietly revolutionary. They extended human capability. Before spectacles, aging often meant intellectual decline. Not because the mind weakened, but because the eyes could no longer read. Glasses allowed scholars, teachers, and scientists to continue their work. They preserved knowledge. They prolonged productivity. They changed how long people could contribute to society. And perhaps most importantly, they showed something profound. Human limitations are not always permanent. Sometimes they can be corrected. With a small piece of glass and the right understanding of light. When we look back across history, the stories we explored tonight might seem unrelated. A dangerous dinner with Henry VIII. A bone flute carved tens of thousands of years ago. A walled Persian garden in the middle of a desert. A small pair of lenses designed to correct failing eyesight. But beneath these stories runs the same quiet thread. Human curiosity. Again and again, across centuries, people looked at the world around them and asked a simple question. What if things could be different? A Tudor king believed he could reshape an entire kingdom to secure his legacy. And in many ways, he did. His decisions changed the course of English religion and politics for generations. Meanwhile, somewhere in a prehistoric cave, a person experimented with hollow bone and breath. That small curiosity eventually led to orchestras, symphonies, and music that now fills concert halls around the world. In ancient Persia, engineers and gardeners looked across dry, unforgiving landscapes and imagined something impossible. A place of flowing water, shade, order, life flourishing in the middle of harsh terrain. They built paradise with walls, trees, and careful geometry. And centuries later, People across the world still design gardens based on those same principles. Elsewhere, glassmakers in medieval Italy examined the way light passed through curved surfaces. They realized that vision could be corrected. The blur that once ended a scholar's career could now be reversed with a small piece of glass. A simple invention, yet one that extended human knowledge itself. History is often told through battles, empires, and powerful rulers. But sometimes the most important changes begin quietly. A person shaping a flute, a gardener directing water through stone channels, a craftsman polishing a lens, a scholar testing how light bends. None of them knew how far their ideas would travel, yet each small discovery expanded human experience. Music gave emotion a voice. Gardens transformed landscapes into harmony. Eyeglasses reshaped perception itself. And even a royal dinner could alter the political future of an entire nation. When we step back far enough, history begins to reveal a pattern. Humans are always experimenting, always adjusting, always searching for ways to understand the world a little more clearly. Sometimes those experiments lead to beauty. Sometimes they lead to conflict. Often, they lead to both. But the impulse remains the same: to create, to explore, to shape the invisible forces around us. Sound, light, nature, power. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about history is not how different the past was. It is how familiar it feels. The people who carved flutes, planted gardens, studied light, or navigated royal courts were not so different from us. They were curious, they were ambitious, they were hopeful, they were flawed, and like us, they were trying to understand their place in a complicated world. The tools they left behind, music, architecture, science, stories, continue to shape our lives today. Even when we no longer notice them. So as the night grows quiet, and the world outside slows down, remember that history is not only something that happened long ago. It is the long record of human imagination. One idea at a time. One experiment at a time. One breath through a hollow bone. Echoing through thousands of years. And somewhere in that echo, the past still speaks. Softly, patiently, waiting for us to listen. As night deepens, history becomes quieter. The loud moments, battles, royal proclamations, revolutions, slowly fade into the background. What remains are the smaller things. A king walking through torchlit gardens, thinking about legacy. A musician lifting an ancient flute to their lips. Water flowing gently through the stone channels of a Persian garden. A scholar adjusting a pair of spectacles to read one more page before the candle burns out. These are the quiet moments that rarely appear in dramatic history books. Yet they are often the moments that shape the world most profoundly. Across thousands of years, human life has followed a surprisingly familiar rhythm. People wake, they work, they create, they worry about the future, they hope their efforts will matter. The people who lived in Tudor England worried about reputation and power. The builders of Persian gardens worried about water and survival. Medieval glassmakers worried about precision and craftsmanship. Even the earliest musicians worried about something very human: expression. How to turn feeling into sound. The details of their lives were different from ours. But the emotions were not. Curiosity, ambition, fear, hope. These are constants in human history. Time moves forward, but the past never completely disappears. It leaves traces. Music that still echoes in modern instruments. Garden designs that still influence architecture. Optical science that still shapes how millions of people see the world each day. Even the political consequences of Henry VIII's reign still ripple through English history centuries later. History is not simply a sequence of finished events. It is a chain of influence. Every generation inherits ideas from the one before it. Sometimes those ideas are improved. Sometimes they are forgotten. Sometimes they return in unexpected ways. But they never truly vanish. In a way, history is a conversation stretching across thousands of years. A musician from prehistoric Europe begins a melody. Centuries later, another musician adds harmony. Architects in ancient Persia shape landscapes according to cosmic balance. Later cultures adapt those ideas into gardens of their own. Glassmakers experiment with curved lenses. Scientists study light. Modern engineers refine the technology even further. Each generation continues the work of the previous one. The conversation never ends. It simply changes voices. There is something strangely comforting about this. Civilizations rise and fall. Empires appear powerful, then disappear. Kings come and go. But human creativity continues. Someone is always carving a new instrument, designing a new garden, discovering a new scientific principle, or telling a new story about the past. History is not only about power or conflict. It is also about patience, observation, curiosity, the slow accumulation of knowledge across generations. And so tonight's journey through history slowly comes to an end. We began in the royal halls of Tudor England. We traveled back tens of thousands of years to the first musical instruments. We walked through the ordered beauty of ancient Persian gardens. And we followed the long path that led to something as ordinary and extraordinary as a pair of eyeglasses. Different stories, different centuries, yet all connected by one simple idea. Humans are always trying to understand their world. Sometimes through power, sometimes through art, sometimes through science, but always through curiosity. Now the torches in Hampton Court fade. The music in the cave grows quiet. The garden fountains slow beneath the night sky. And the scholar closes their book, removing their glasses as the candle finally goes dark. History rests for the night, but its stories remain, waiting patiently for the next curious mind to listen. Good night. There is a certain stillness that comes when we step back from the noise of history. The louder events, coronations, wars, royal decrees, tend to dominate textbooks. But when those echoes fade, something quieter remains. The ordinary lives that unfolded between those moments. Imagine the world centuries ago, long after the royal banquet halls emptied and the candles burned low. In the countryside of Tudor England, farmers rose before sunrise just as people do today. In Persian cities, gardeners walked the narrow paths of carefully tended orchards, checking the flow of water through stone channels. In European monasteries, scribes leaned over wooden desks while the morning light filtered through stained glass windows. History often feels distant because we focus on extraordinary events. But most of the past was made of ordinary days. And those days contained the real rhythm of human life. The quiet work of time. Time changes everything slowly. A flute carved from bone becomes an ancestor of the violin. A royal garden design becomes the inspiration for parks across continents. A fragile pair of medieval spectacles becomes modern optical science. The transformation rarely happens all at once. Instead, ideas travel quietly. One person learns something, another improves it, another carries it to a new place. And over generations, small changes accumulate into something remarkable. This is how human progress usually works. Not through sudden miracles, but through patience. Many of the objects mentioned in tonight's stories still exist today. Archaeologists have carefully preserved ancient bone flutes discovered in European caves. Fragments of Persian gardens remain visible in archaeological sites. Early spectacles are displayed in museums, their metal frames delicate but still recognizable. Each object carries a story. Someone once held that flute. Someone once walked through that garden. Someone once adjusted those glasses to read a page more clearly. The people themselves are long gone, but the things they created remain. And through those objects, we glimpse their world. History rarely speaks loudly. It whispers. Through fragments of pottery, through half-erased carvings in stone, through music recreated from ancient instruments, through letters written centuries ago. To understand the past requires patience. Historians spend years studying these quiet clues. A single artifact can open a window into an entire civilization. A garden layout reveals how people understood nature. A musical instrument reveals how they expressed emotion. A pair of glasses reveals how they adapted to the limits of the human body. Piece by piece, these fragments rebuild forgotten worlds. Perhaps the most surprising discovery historians make is how familiar the past often feels. People centuries ago worried about their futures. They fell in love. They feared illness. They celebrated success. They told stories. They created art. The technology surrounding them was different. The political systems were different. But the human experience itself was strikingly similar. The same curiosity that led ancient musicians to experiment with sound still drives modern creativity today. The same desire to create beauty in harsh landscapes still shapes gardens and cities. The same determination to overcome physical limitations still drives scientific innovation. Across thousands of years, humanity has been engaged in the same quiet project. Trying to understand the world. Trying to improve life within it. If we listen carefully, the past begins to feel less like a distant place and more like a long conversation. Every generation adds its voice, sometimes loudly, sometimes softly, but always continuing the story. The king walking through his palace gardens, the musician breathing life into a flute, the gardener guiding water through desert soil, the scholar adjusting the glasses under candlelight. All of them were part of that same unfolding narrative. And tonight, as you listened to these stories, you became part of it too. Because history only continues when someone chooses to remember it. And now the night grows quieter still. The torches are gone. The music fades. The garden fountains continue their gentle rhythm beneath the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a final page closes. History rests. But the stories remain, waiting patiently for another evening. Another listener, another curious mind willing to follow them through time. Eventually, every era grows quiet. The noise of courts, markets, and battlefields fades. Voices that once filled great halls disappear. Even the grandest cities slowly change. But history never truly vanishes. It settles, like dust on an old manuscript, waiting for someone to open the pages again. If you could stand in the ruins of an ancient palace at night, you might notice how peaceful it feels. The same corridors that once echoed with footsteps and conversation now hold only the sound of wind. Yet those walls remember. They remember the laughter of banquets, the whispered political conversations in shadowed corners, the music that drifted across candlelit rooms. Places carry memory long after people are gone. The earth itself is the greatest historian. It keeps records in quiet ways. Layers of soil preserve fragments of pottery. Riverbanks reveal buried tools. Caves protect ancient carvings and paintings. For thousands of years, these objects remain hidden beneath the surface. Until someone begins to dig. Archaeologists work slowly, carefully brushing dust away from small discoveries. A single broken instrument, a piece of carved stone, the frame of an old pair of spectacles. To someone unfamiliar with history, these objects might seem insignificant, but to a historian, they are clues. Each one tells a story, and when those stories are assembled together, the past begins to breathe again. One of the most remarkable things about human history is how ideas travel through time. A melody played on an ancient flute eventually becomes part of musical traditions across continents. A garden design created in Persia influences parks in distant cities centuries later. A small improvement in lens making leads to modern science and technology. Ideas move quietly, they cross borders, they survive wars and political change. Even when civilizations disappear, their ideas often continue. Sometimes the people who benefit from them no longer remember where they began. But the influence remains. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is creating something new. Perhaps a musician is experimenting with sound. Perhaps a scientist is studying light. Perhaps an architect is designing a garden meant to bring calm to a busy city. These moments may seem small, but so did the moments we explored tonight. The first flute was just a hollow bone. The first Persian garden was simply a walled patch of earth. The first eyeglasses were two rough lenses held together by a rivet. Yet each small invention changed the human experience. And somewhere in the future, historians may look back at our own time in the same way, noticing the quiet ideas that slowly transformed the world. For now, though, the night invites stillness. The stories of kings, musicians, engineers, and scholars drift gently into the background. The long arc of history continues moving forward, just as it always has. But for a moment, it pauses, like the calm surface of a garden pool, reflecting the sky, reflecting the stars, and reflecting the countless lives that shaped the world we live in today. History never truly sleeps, but tonight, it rests. And so perhaps, it is time for us to rest as well. If you listen closely, history often sounds like an echo. Not a loud one, something softer, a faint repetition of voices that once filled the world. Imagine walking through an old garden at night, perhaps one that was once carefully designed centuries ago. The pathways are still there. The trees have grown taller. Water still moves slowly through the channels. But the people who first built the garden are gone. And yet their intention remains. Every stone they placed still guides the flow of water. Every tree they planted still shapes the shade. Their decisions continue to exist quietly within the landscape. History works much the same way. The past rarely disappears. It simply becomes part of the background of our lives. Consider how many ordinary things around us are connected to ancient ideas. Music still follows patterns discovered long ago. Gardens still reflect ancient geometry. Even the simple act of putting on glasses in the morning connects us to centuries of experimentation with light and vision. These things have become so familiar that we rarely notice them. But each one carries the weight of history. Every invention begins as an experiment. Someone trying something new. Sometimes that attempt fails. Sometimes it becomes part of everyday life for millions of people. And when that happens, the original discovery slowly fades into memory. The result remains. It is easy to think of history only in terms of great leaders. Kings, emperors, famous philosophers. But most of history was created by people whose names we will never know. The craftsman who first drilled holes into a bone flute. The gardener who patiently guided water through desert soil. The glassmaker who spent hours polishing a curved lens. None of them expected to be remembered. They were simply doing their work. And yet their work shaped the world. The story of humanity is built from millions of these quiet contributions. Each one small, each one meaningful. The calm perspective of distance. When we step back and view history from a distance, something interesting happens. Events that once felt urgent become calm. Conflicts that once seemed world-changing settle into the background of time. What remains are the patterns. Human creativity, human curiosity, human resilience. Across thousands of years, those patterns repeat again and again. Different cultures, different languages, different technologies, yet the same fundamental questions appear in every era. How can we understand the world? How can we improve it? How can we leave something behind that lasts? Even now, as the night grows quiet, history continues unfolding. New discoveries are being made. New ideas are being tested. Some of those ideas will fade quickly. Others may last centuries. Future historians will look back on our time just as we look back on the past. They will study the objects we leave behind. Our buildings, our tools, our music, our technology, and they will try to understand what it was like to live in this moment. Just as we try to understand those who came before us. For now, though, the past can rest. The royal halls of Hampton Court fall silent. The ancient flute rests beside the fading fire. The Persian garden stands beneath the stars, its water flowing quietly through stone channels. A scholar closes a book and removes their glasses, the candle beside them slowly burning down. History has never truly been about noise. It has always been about continuity. One generation living, learning, creating, then passing those discoveries forward. A long chain stretching across thousands of years. And tonight, for a moment, we simply listen to that chain. The past spoke, softly, patiently, and now the night grows still again. Night has a way of changing how we think about the past. During the day, history often feels crowded. Dates, names, battles, inventions, kings, discoveries, all rushing together. But at night, when everything grows quieter, the past feels slower. Almost peaceful. It becomes easier to imagine the people who lived long before us. Not as distant figures in textbooks, but as ordinary human beings moving through their own days. Imagine a morning in Tudor England. The palace servants rise before sunrise. Wood fires are lit in the kitchens. The smell of bread slowly fills the air. Somewhere in the palace gardens, Dew rests on the leaves. A musician might quietly tune a lute. A scholar might open a book beside a window where the light is strongest. For them, history was not something dramatic. It was simply life. They could not know that centuries later people would still be curious about their world. Travel further back in time. Before great palaces, before written language, before cities, small groups of humans gather around fires in dark landscapes. They listen to the sounds of wind across open land, to the rhythm of footsteps, to the quiet breathing of animals nearby. And then someone lifts a carved bone flute. A sound fills the air. Simple, clear, a human voice carried through an instrument. Perhaps that moment felt small, but it marked something important. The discovery that humans could shape the invisible. That sound could become music. And once that idea existed, it never disappeared. The same pattern appears again and again in history. Someone notices something unusual, light bending through glass, water flowing more easily through a narrow channel, the way certain notes sound beautiful together. These observations begin quietly. They are experiments, curiosities, but over time they grow into knowledge. A small idea becomes a craft. The craft becomes a tradition. The tradition becomes part of the world itself. Eventually, people forget where the idea began, but they continue using it every day. History never truly stops. It only slows. Generations come and go. Cities change. Empires rise and fall. But human curiosity continues moving forward. Somewhere tonight, someone is practicing a musical instrument. Somewhere a scientist is studying light through a microscope. Somewhere a gardener is planting trees that may grow for decades. All of them are part of the same long story. The quiet continuation of human effort. And now the night becomes still again. The ancient gardens grow dark beneath the stars. The palace halls empty. The music fades. Even the pages of history seem to rest. But beneath that silence, the story continues. Ideas travel through time. Memories wait patiently to be rediscovered. And tomorrow, someone else will begin asking questions about the past. Just as we did tonight. For now, though, the world grows quiet. The past settles gently into the background. And history, that endless conversation across centuries, pauses for a moment of rest. Good night.